And we're back with State Representative Doyle Heffley here in the Generally Assembled Studios. And today we're talking about what isn't being done in the State House. It seems like since the Democrats have taken over here, there is a lot that normally is achieved that has just gone undone. And primarily we're talking about education and the funding of the state budget. Schools are still waiting to get some of their money and to have the money distributed. What is going on here? What are we waiting for?
Yeah, normally when we started doing these podcasts, I like to talk about what we're getting done, what the initiatives are, and there's a lot of things that need to be addressed throughout our Commonwealth. If you look at, the issue with fentanyl on our streets, the crime increases in our urban areas like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and what's going on in our communities, and yet we're back again now in Harrisburg, and we still have not finalized the budget. The Democrats in a gerrymandered majority of 102 to 101, have stuck together, and they're running the House floor, but they're not governing. And at the end of the day, a lot of people were very frustrated with what went on in D.C. over the last couple of weeks. But here in the State House, we have the Senate has sent over some code bills we've been able to get done to make sure that hospitals have finally received their funding that they need. And these are important bills that need to get done along with that budget. And we're back today, and really on the schedule, there isn't anything that's going to address the Supreme Court or the court's ruling that we need to properly fund our schools. It's something I've been advocating for many years, and making sure that all of our schools are getting their fair share of state funding. And at the same time, we still haven't funded all of our after-school programs. So, we really need to get that done. And yet we're here today running some resolutions and doing some other things, but we really need to get to roll up our sleeves, and they need to work in a bipartisan manner with the Senate, get the governor's office involved, and get this budget done.
And really, we have to put this in perspective, and the perspective is we're on the doorstep in November here. Yeah. School's been back for a month and a half, 2 months. We've been trying to get things done. Normally, we'd be achieving. It seems like we're spinning our wheels, and it seems like we're spinning our wheels for no good reason, and or just not coming to work, not being in Harrisburg, not getting anything done. More of a what we're not doing than what we're doing. Yeah. Games are being played rather than trying to do the business of the people. How do we get ourselves focused back on what should be, and what should the focus be?
Yeah, really what we've seen from Leader Bradford and the Democratic caucus is just running bills on the House floor that don't have any chance of getting passed in the Senate, and more or less putting up votes for political purposes. They're not governing. They're looking at the next election cycle. We've been through budget impasses before with the Wolf administration. We went months without finalizing the state budget. But I got to say, when that went through, we were here. We were here a record number of days. We were here in August, in July. There was no time taken off. There was constantly negotiations being done. And we passed a lot of parts of that budget, and the sticking points were passed at a later time. But we kept working at it. I haven't seen that push at all. And I think a lot of it comes from the mistrust from the governor's office right now in the Senate because of the governor reneging on his commitment early on to fund some scholarship programs for students stuck in low-achieving schools. But since that time, there really hasn't been any back and forth between the Senate and the House. Like I said, just the other week, we finally passed the hospital assessment, which is $700 million that needs to get driven out to our hospitals. Hospitals don't operate for free. Nurses and doctors and people that work at hospitals, they get a paycheck, right? And making sure that those dollars are coming in so people have access to good quality health care was very important. And the Senate finally passed a bill, and the House agreed to take it up. The Senate has been somewhat of the adults in the room, and that the Democratic leadership in the House, that one seat gerrymandered majority or humble majority, whatever they want to call it, it needs to be a governing majority, and that's what they're not doing.
Absolutely. You said the word governing here, and it seems like that's what we're missing in a lot of the discussion. Right now, it's just House leadership, Democrat House leadership, that likes to stand pat and or do these political maneuvers. Case in point, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about election law and just batting that back and forth and achieving very little.
It was weeks about a debate. The Senate passed a bill, in I think in August. It could have easily been taken up by the House, and if we wanted to move the primary election date forward to give the voters in Pennsylvania, a more relevant say in the presidential primary. But yet they drug their feet. They tried to make it political. They were passing amendments after the 11 p.m. cutoff, which is against House rules, and backdoor trying to do things to pretty much they wanted to permanently mail out a ballot to every resident in Pennsylvania with no accountability is what their end game was, and that fell through. They couldn't even get the support in their own caucus. But at the same time, we still have, the budget isn't completed yet. Usually, and this is my 7th term in office, by this time in the cycle, we've had many bills that would have been passed, and there's a lot of things out there addressed. We have a behavioral health crisis. We have a fentanyl crisis that unfortunately at the national level, our president has done nothing to stop the free flow of fentanyl into our Commonwealth and into our nation. And now you look at what's going on overseas, and it just exacerbates our inability to get things done here.
How do we get the point across that it's time to get to work?
So, one of the things that I got a resolution passed today out of the House Transportation Committee to address the truck parking on interstates. And maybe that's a small issue to some, but it's a big issue when you look at traffic safety and logistics and everything else that we do in our Commonwealth. But you got to work in a bipartisan manner. And I worked with my colleagues across the aisle. Now, you can't... most of us, we're not going to compromise on our core values or beliefs. But at the end of the day, what the Democratic leadership is failing to do, and you see it in some of the rulings that have come down from Speaker McClinton on the House floor, it just ending debate, making motions for germaneness or constitutionality on amendments, and actually, instead of actually addressing it, working through the legislative process, amending bills to refine bills so they can get passed on final. And I think that's something that is totally lacking, is that ability of the Democratic leadership to govern, to work across the aisle. They have a one-seat majority, and the Republicans control the Senate. They need to work together, and instead of just these political moves to kind of message and just run some hot topic, progressive, woke agenda item to put up for a House floor vote to try to make a soundbite somewhere, they need to start governing.
Let's talk about the votes on germanity and the constitutionality of bills. This is something that keeps coming up on the House floor. It's driving people nuts. It drives me nuts when I see it. And what drives me nuts is that we're deciding, not we, the House majority is deciding that amendments or bills are out of order on a constitutional basis, or making a chair's decision, when you could literally vote on the bill 2 minutes later and achieve the same thing, but then at least debate the bill. They just don't want to hear the debate. They don't want to even bring up the topic of any dissent.
Earlier in the session, I had I filed a constitutional amendment to a piece of legislation that would have enabled residents throughout the Commonwealth to benefit if they live in their home for more than 10 years, if there's a county-wide reassessment, that their property taxes wouldn't go through the roof. And it would allow the local governments to make an exemption for those folks. And it's a constitutional amendment. But yet, Leader Bradford, and this is how absurd it is, actually said on the House floor that it was unconstitutional to amend the Constitution. And I don't know how there's a process. How we amend the Constitution in Pennsylvania is a bill must pass in the House and the Senate 2 consecutive terms, exact same language, and then it goes up to the voters for a vote. So that's the constitutional process. To make that argument just shows the lack of appreciation for the institution, the lack of just ability to govern. Instead of actually making a debate why you didn't agree that people that live in their homes for a long time shouldn't have to have their property taxes go through the roof and lose their home in a reassessment, they chose to go the route of it's not constitutional, which it is constitutional, because all we were doing is amending the Constitution to expand what the Constitution already allows in certain counties to the entire state. So it was a ridiculous argument, and it just shows that they're not about governing, they're just about making political points.